Once, there was an ape and a man who jumped. Legacies were born on much less. The Jumpman wound up starring in a blockbuster film and the ape became old and bitter, which perhaps was all for the best, for the ape always had a thing for the kidnapping of women and creation of nefarious platforming challenges. Yes, legacies are all fine and dandy, but how good are they, in actuality? In fact, are any of the old arcade classics interesting to play nowadays, if ever they were? These questions and many more will probably not be answered, but I shall attempt nonetheless. The first Donkey Kong game is simply titled Donkey Kong, which inevitably leads to the question, why is this ape thing called Donkey, and why is he the title character when he's in fact the villain? Jumpman should have been offered the prestigious role, but I'm rambling. We start out in this twisting set of metal rows, all leading me ever upward to my beloved princess. The titular donkey begins sending casks down the metal staircase, and this is the first brilliant element here. These casks are not entirely predetermined, which means that every time Donkey picks one up, its pattern coming down cannot be anticipated completely. It might bounce the entire screen, from end to end of each metal row, or it might slip through one of the staircases. Occasionally it slips the whole structure and lands precisely where it's dropped. There cannot be an infinite set of patterns because an infinite simulation of patterns is fundamentally impossible, but there can be an equal chance for each pattern to be randomly activated, and depending on the number of overall patterns, the chances of getting an exact same number of them in a row can be astronomically high indeed. We can see whether or not there is a pattern to memorize by reloading the stage a few times and recording where the barrels go. The first barrel will always fall down and either kill you immediately or create a fiery enemy which will haunt all the way throughout the level. This has a clear purpose to force the player to move forward. There is no stopping and admiring the sights, nor any such attempt at memorizing any pattern that might exist. The player must move and deal with the dangers as they come. As for the second barrel, we can chart a course throughout the 7 times we played the beginning and see that not a one is exactly alike. In fact, with this many possible ways of descent, there are, if my math does not elude me, over 800 different routes the cask might take, which simply dwarf the meager 8 Jumpman has to climb his way up. And this is just for the second barrel, of course. But you get the point. In summary, you'll never quite know where the barrels are gonna roll, which is a two-edged sword if ever there was one. I did claim this randomized pattern element of the barrel rolls to be quite brilliant, but with it comes the added frustration of never being quite sure which ladder to take, which brings me to the second interesting design decision here. The arrangement and quality of the ladders themselves. Certainly it would have been far better to place 2 ladders in each row, one at each end, forcing the player to walk the whole length to progress to the next level, right? But in here lies the testament to this level's longevity, that the player has choice regarding his progress because of the uneven number of ladders. Putting the arcade and the NES versions side by side, we can see that this specific disposition was most intentional, one broken right at the beginning, another complete near the end, 2 complete the following row, one at the middle and another at the far end. The third row has another broken ladder at the start and 2 more complete, set much like the ones below. The fourth row has another incomplete even closer to the start and once more 2 complete, but a bit closer together and farther. The final row has a single broken ladder halfway through and a single complete at the end. Why have broken ladders at all, though? Well, as we have seen before, in order for the barrel's pattern to be richer than the Jumpman's, there must be more ways for the barrels to go down the ladders than Jumpman to go up. The broken ladders facilitate this advantage. There are 8 unbroken ladders for 5 rows we must traverse, not counting the final row and ladder at the very top. If the designer had placed the ladders at the very end of each row, then he would have needed only 5 for the player to get to the end. The extra ladders are what's important here, however, since they create further complexity in the ascent. If the arrangement had been like this, then there would be only one path the player can use to the top. Yes, he would have had to contend with the barrels for a fun platforming challenge, but it would be decidedly linear. This way the player has multiple ways he can use, some of which might skip any and all barrels altogether. 8 complete ladders means there are 8 possible paths to take, and while there might be better paths to take regarding strategy, the fact that there are so many ways to climb the tower means there is always an element of experimentation and improvisation when playing this level. The second level is not the second level. Because of the strange structure this game has, which might have come as a result of its arcade nature, the second level, aptly named Pie Factory, is actually the 7th level. This is because the game repeats previous stages made more difficult. What this adds to the game is questionable. Repeating the first level 3 times in order to access the Pie Factory can be a tad boring, but that might be because the game was never meant to be played the way I'm analyzing it. Nonetheless, it makes the game less interesting because the player is locked from new content by way of being forced to repeat earlier levels. Anyway, Pie Factory is a very different level from the first, although it doesn't quite look that way from a first glance. There are ladders once again, and there are little fire guys, and your objective is still to rise to the top, but let me tell you the differences. For one, experimentation isn't incentivized as much as the first level. Essentially, there are 2 general paths the player might take to the princess, because there are only 2 ladders leading to the final platform. Each path is forked in the middle, because of the 4 ladders below the keg, but you're forced to head either left or right. Added to this are the fire creatures which roam the left side only. I played this level once or twice and not a once did they cross to the right, which inevitably pushed the player to the path on the right, guided by the path of least resistance. There's not as much improvisation as the first level. As for the treadmills themselves, they do provide an interesting challenge because you have to time your jumps a tad more accurately as more and more merriful repasts glide by, but that may not be enough with such an overt gain in linearity. The third level is by far the most linear out of the 4, which only detracts from my enjoyment. From 8 tangled paths in the first level to a forced 4 in the second, we end up with a mere 1 in the third. Right away there are ascending and descending platforms which confound me, but which I must use to traverse my way to the princess. These platforms reveal the first issue in the level, which is the seemingly arbitrary and restrictive fall damage which kills you right away. Stepping from the first platform kills you, and jumping poorly onto one of the platforms kills you. This removes the option of crossing the lower platform onto these ones going up, but there's no good contextual reason for it. Why not have a fire enemy there and allow me the choice of passage? Or have some spikes displaced so I have to jump over them? As it stands, I have to go up on these platforms, jump onto the middle area here with the blazing demon, and then jump onto the descending platforms. The only choice is whether to jump right away to the bottom part or wait for the higher one, but that choice is once more taken from us by the fire creature and the very thin allowance in the platforms themselves. Essentially, you have to go one way or the other, and the choice is taken from you by the fire creature. If the enemy's here, you have to go through here and vice versa. Once on the right side of the board, all you have to do is allow free passage to this springboard, and since it has a very repeated pattern, you can anticipate its downfall quite easily. All in all, this isn't a particularly interesting level because it shirks the dynamics the first played with so effortlessly. The path you're supposed to take is linear, and you're more likely to die from fall damage, which only exists to restrict the player from using the bottom platform. A considerate low point in the game, in my opinion. Level 4 seems to understand what makes this game tick. Instead of forking the player down specific paths by restricting jumps or drowning a certain section with enemies, This level operates more like a pyramid with a 3-4-3-4 ladder pattern, and since the player isn't forced to head up, in fact the player must come down at least once to finish the level, there is immediately a lot more freedom to move and to choose where to move. There are fire enemies roaming about, but they go up and down the ladders, left and right on the platforms, so the objective is to evade them by clever use of the ladders instead of simply circumventing them altogether. Meanwhile, the player must pass by each of these rivets, therefore stomping them out of this earth and onto oblivion. This creates further dynamics as the player can choose to sweep these rivets horizontally or vertically, or any each way he or she wishes. With 8 rivets there are over 40,000 different patterns of rivet stomping, some more beneficial to the player of course, and the lower ones will tend to be the first to be stomped, but nonetheless the choice is yours. You can make the level more challenging to yourself choosing a specific pattern. This freedom is mighty fun, but still I think the first level beats this one because the objective is a lot clearer and the enemies/obstacles more thrilling to avoid. Like a lot of great jazz albums, this is one game that starts out with its best song. Once we're done with the ape, we arrive at the top to smooch our desired madam. Enjoy it, Jumpman, you've earned it.